Good evening. It is Monday evening, and that means one thing. It's time for the Anglo-Italian pod, Monday night Euro review. As always, my name is Rory, and I'm joined by my very good friends. Let's go.
Adam and
Ben. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, boys. How are we doing, Ben? How are we doing? Good weekend?
Good weekend. Yeah, thanks, mate. All good. Lots of football. Obviously, with the winter break, it's kind of been split over 2 weekends. It's like you kind of like, oh, there's only 2 games this Saturday. But where it's all on TV, it's kind of good to sort of consume it, at least with the Premier League anyway. But lots to talk about, lots happening. So, yeah, looking forward to getting into it.
Nice. And Adam, you had a weekend off from the football as well because of the weather.
Yep.
Port Vale couldn't get their shit sorted.
Yeah. Exactly. They don't have heated pitches or anything like that in the kind of lower league, shall we say. So I had that misfortune. However, I did screw myself over with fantasy football, thinking that Ivan Toney was available. I'll do that quick transfer. He'll score me some easy points. And unfortunately, it counts for next week when they play Tottenham. So I was buggered there. So unfortunately, yes, I'm sure pretty much lots of people did the same thing. But grateful to see actually my little boy win man of the match at his little boy's team. So he had he looks like Maradona-esque the way he was playing in the mud. But yeah, too much expectations. But Rory, how has your weekend been? More importantly, mate,
a fantastic weekend. Arsenal won and the Alex won. This is only the 3rd time it's happened this year, and both teams are having a good season. Like I had a theory that was like it's proof that there's like a ration of happiness for each person. The fact that 2 teams having a good season never win on the same weekend. But this weekend they did both win. So it was very, very good. I had a great Saturday. And of course was watching a lot of AFCON. So many great goals, so many great games. And the headline today, Ivory Coast getting slapped 4-0 in a home tournament, meaning they cannot go through. They're officially out. Absolute scenes at AFCON. So yeah, very, very good weekend. But we've got lots to talk about in the Premier League and Serie A. We're going to start in the Premier League talking about Nottingham Forest and Brentford. The very low-key return of Ivan Toney. He just kind of snuck into the league, right? Nobody really noticed. We'll be talking about the battle at Bramall Lane. I'll get to talk about Arsenal finally in a positive way, and then we will give Liverpool their flowers. In Serie A, we need to talk about, unfortunately, another incident of racism, but Milan getting the goal and Maginan having the last laugh. We'll be talking about Juve and how they're starting to build on the 1-0 wins, and De Rossi's flying start at the Olimpico. Is this a bit of promise? As well as all the action down at the bottom with mixed results for many teams. But let's start in the Premier League, and let's start with Toney's very low-key return. He had a WWE-style entrance. Ben, it was all a bit over the top, wasn't it? It was like he'd come back from a serious illness.
Just a bit. It was like he'd come back from war or something. It was just like this week is. I mean, we've chatted about it on our group chat and stuff. Like this week has just been ridiculous, like absolutely ridiculous. Like there was when the whole thing happened with Ivan Toney at the back end of last season, I did feel quite a bit of sympathy for him because there's this whole conversation to be had around gambling in football, given the fact that Brentford themselves are sponsored by a betting company, all this kind of hypocrisy that goes on. But as kind of time has gone on and as we've got closer to his return and the weird PR like trip that he's been on the last week has kind of unfolded, and the way he's constantly, in my opinion, disrespected Brentford a hell of a lot. It was just amazing to see the reception and what they sort of put on for him. It was like, you do realize what he's been saying about you all week, right? It's like he can't wait to get out of there, yet you're treating it like, I don't know, some wrestlers just walked in the ring. Yeah, it's like WrestleMania. It was like, it was just crazy, and it felt inevitable that he was going to score. And even his goal was kind of marred with a little bit of controversy as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, I found the whole thing very just weird and uncomfortable. And it's like on commentary where when he scored the goal and the commentator was saved. I said this in the TikTok post. I was like, the commentator was gushing over like, these are incredible scenes, all this kind of stuff. And then he went over and got that shirt that said, "For you, Uncle Brian," or whatever. It's like, you've just been saved there. Because like calling it incredible, like amazing, beautiful scenes after he's just got a goal from coming back from a suspension that was, he broke the rules. You're not allowed to do what he's done. And it was just like the gushing over it. It was like Sky weren't allowed to say anything bad about him either. It was just bizarre. But yeah, I mean, he sort of did what he said he was going to do, and sort of even that I find weird because he sort of acted like he was going to prove all the doubters wrong. It's like I saw a podcast clip going around from Filthy Fellas saying that nobody's doubted Ivan Toney this whole time. I don't really understand where he's coming from. Like that's what's been even more bizarre. But in his eyes, he shut everybody up, scored a goal, played well. Like he is a very good striker. And it was a good game. Lots of good goals in that game as well. Thought Danilo's strike,
fantastic goal.
Mopé again. Mopé's the striker that's proven everyone wrong.
We need to talk about Mopé because he is on a bit of a run now. He's getting some goals, and this looks like a bit of clever business from Brentford. When they got him in on loan from Everton, he's still under contract out, right? We were kind of laughing, being like, "All right, like Palace getting Roy back for one more time, Brentford are getting Mopé back." But it is actually working. He's got the goal there, and he's on a bit of a run. So fair play. But Adam, I was going to go to you. With that entrance, it put a lot of pressure on Toney, I think, right? You can't have that entrance and then just be completely anonymous. Well, he definitely wasn't anonymous. Does it say a lot about his character that he did live up to it? And he massively broke the rules moving the ball for the free kick, right?
Yeah, I mean, let's focus on the personality. He has got a bit of swagger, a bit of cockiness, arrogance to his game, and that's what potentially you could argue that Brentford have been missing. They've been missing someone that is prolific and has got the boldness to kind of break the deadlock or create those opportunities that maybe the other strikers don't do maybe naturally in their kind of gameplay. And they've been missing obviously Mbeumo as well as Wissa, which has really thwarted that kind of attacking element. And it's interesting how their set plays really played a part in this as well, and Toney's really clever even in those situations as well. But if we go to that kind of midfield, he took advantage, it has to be said, of basically you could see what the Brentford players were doing, deflecting the referee at the same time. But clearly that was something that he knew. They knew Ryan Yates would potentially move if he was jumping in the free kick. But also I think, no disrespect, but Nottingham Forest should have set up a bit better. They whether that's the blame of the goalkeeper, I don't know. But personally, I would have probably said, goalkeeper, you've got to get it covered if you don't have an extra man on that side. So, you know what? Toney took advantage. No one saw it until very late on, and he scored a goal. So it was inevitable, as Dean, even Ben called out in his TikTok. It was inevitable to happen. But yeah, I think there's a sour taste about the way he's spoken about various different things, including advertising himself. Even in this light of, Brentford are stuck with him. They've trusted him. They're paying his wages, for God's sake, and for he has the arrogance to do that as well. And that's, for me, I think will put off a lot of suitors off him potentially, because now they're going to go, is he going to actually care about us, or is he just going to fuck off in about 12 months time when he sees a better offer? So it's a bit of a sour taste, but Brentford need him at this stage of the season. They need him for the rest of this campaign. I would be very surprised if they sold him in January transfer window, but let's wait and see.
Yeah, I think he at least owes them until the end of the season. They've paid him for 8 months for something that, and like Ben alluded to, there is an awful lot of grey area between football and betting and what's like, there's a lot of like muddy water there, but it is also kind of his fault. He's not coming back from serious illness. He's not coming back from war. He is coming back from breaking the rules. So I think for them to pay his wages, the least he owes them is to keep them in the division and stay until summer, but we will see. But Ben, I'm going to go to you. For Forest, they're now only 4 points above the relegation zone. We've kind of said the whole season, there's 3 teams worse than everyone. So they'll be fine, but their name is being linked with a lot of FFP breaches. Nuno has got the 2 wins in their last 5. I know he's not been in charge for all of them, but do you think Nuno will do enough to keep them up, or do you think FFP is going to see them down?
I think if FFP wasn't in the question, I think he would keep them up. But obviously, what's hanging over their head is a potential points deduction that we don't actually know the severity of yet. It's the same with Everton. Obviously, they could be facing another deduction. They don't know whether it's going to be 6 points or 10 points. Forest the same, and it feels a little bit. I struggle to kind of sympathise with Forest because I think the way that they've ran themselves into this situation is quite poor. I sympathise with the fans. It's the same as Everton. But they have been poorly run, and that's not the fans' fault. It's not Nuno's fault. It's not Steve Cooper's fault, and it's not the players' fault either. Obviously, Cooper had to deal with it when he was there, and he almost got out at a pretty good time because I think they could get sucked into that battle for sure. And I think, like we said, and obviously we'll touch on some of the other teams that played who are in that relegation battle as well. That we've kind of been banking on the fact that there are teams worse than them, like you said, and they'll be fine just because of that. But how many times have we said that before? Sometimes it's all about momentum, and if it only takes Sheffield United or Luton to pick up a couple of results, that completely changed everything. They will still have to play a lot of those teams around there as well. Every game feels massive when you get to like March onwards. We've seen how things can change in the past in terms of these relegation battles. We've seen teams like West Brom and Portsmouth, if you're going back 15 odd years, perform these kind of miracle escapes where everyone gave them no chance in the kind of the months prior. So, they've got to be very, very careful. I do think they've got the quality to stay up. And I do actually think Nuno's done a better job than I thought he was going in there. Again, it was another marginal defeat at the weekend. They were quite unlucky in the game, I thought, to be fair. I think that just shows, like Adam sort of alluded to, with Toney being back for Brentford, they've just been very, very toothless without him, and he's sort of given them the bite that they needed. And I think that was the only difference, despite the fact that, Ben Mead's goal was a good header, although it was poor defending on the set piece, which again, when you're down there, set pieces are going to cost you at both ends of the pitch, or be very important for you at both ends of the pitch. And then Mope's goal was, again, it was a good goal, and they can feel hard done by the Toney free kick as well, because he's clearly, rubbed out the foam on the floor and then moved the ball. He's been clever, and it's also down to Forest to shut that situation off because the organisation of the wall was absolutely terrible, and that's down to the goalkeeper who probably saw it coming. Hudson-Odoi is just standing there, allows the gap, and he goes straight through it, and it's a goal. And then it's just that inquest then begins from there. So those things, like set-piece defending and those sort of situations that you can control, might come back to haunt them. But I think with the players they've got going forward, obviously they're missing Gibbs-White at the weekend. Obviously, Awani is back, I think, in maybe March. And obviously, we talked about the fact that those games almost from March onwards are so crucial. And he had to completely different dimensions to them, especially if you think as well, like how well Chris Wood's been playing for Nottingham Forest. If you can have both of those two, because we know what Awani can do in the Premier League. He's been a goal scorer. He's been a real target man. He's been a real threat for Forest. And if you've got 2 goal scorers being able to play either, he's probably going to have to find a way to play them together, or, Chris Wood can be an impact sub off the bench, or all these things as well. So I think Forest will probably be fine. And I think Nuno has actually done a decent job. It was fine margins at the weekend. But like you said, that, the profit and sustainability accusations are still hanging over their head, and it could be. I'm not sure how true it is, but I saw a thing that was basically saying it might not even be decided until the last weekend of the season. So Forest, Forest and Everton could be in a position where they're safe going into the final day, and then they're handed points deductions. Yeah, or it's after the season, and then they're retrospectively deducted them, which feels incredibly unfair. And this is why I suppose it's another, like a whole separate point, but I feel like with these points deductions, for me, that they should just always be from the start of the following season. Yeah.
There needs to be a deadline date of when a transfer window or whatever. Like in the summer, by this point, all the disciplinary decisions are made, and after that, you can't do it until the next off season. Because again, there was someone I heard talking about it who was saying, well, what is the point in the table then? What's the point in any of the table if just at any random moment you can just have points deducted? It doesn't mean anything. None of it means anything if it's just at the whim of someone. So, I think obviously Forest and Everton fans will be incredibly frustrated. But again, as you said, both clubs have also been ran horrifically badly. They have overspent massively, and they've put themselves in this position, the owners. So I think, it will be a nervy end to the season no matter what happens, I think. But we'll leave Forest and Brentford there. Fantastic win for Brentford. Fantastic return for Ivan Toney. And we'll move on to a game that I really love as a rivalry because one of my friends is a West Ham fan and one of my friends is a Sheffield United fan. And I hear both sides of this bitter rivalry. Now, obviously, it goes all the way back to the Carlos Tevez days. But this was a proper battle. This was 2 red cards, penalty controversy, just a really high-octane game. I really enjoyed it. Adam, what did you make of this game? Did you expect it to be this dirty? I thought it was going to be a bit of a battle.
I think, I definitely felt it was going to be a battle. I don't know necessarily if it was too dirty. Like, for example, Sufar's second yellow card. I don't know if that's legitimately
it's more stupid
a card.
than dirty,
It's more stupid. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of fighting class from Sheffield United to get themselves back into this match and to actually get a point out of it as well. I think that shows you the difference of someone like Chris Wilder, who's just instilling some belief in terms of the way they play. I mean, I know they've been dealt some really bad hands at the beginning of the season where certain players were sold on, but they've done remarkably quite well in the space that Wilder has turned up. And as for West Ham, I wasn't expecting too much out of this match because obviously you had Kudus missing, for example. Bowen, I wasn't actually expecting to turn up for this match because it had him injured for this match initially as well. So the fact that he was able to turn out, but it was really action-packed. So I have to say, Rory, it was really entertaining. It was fantastic kind of quality across both sides. The one kind of comment I'd say is maybe West Ham just feel a bit unlucky and, refereeing decision went against them, especially for that last one where it was 2-2. And for some reason, was it Bowen that got pulled off down to the floor and it was given as a free kick? Like, what on earth? Even my little boy was screaming, that's a penalty. That's a penalty.
If that happens... If that happens in the 75th minute, that's a penalty all day long. It's that it's the 105th minute and VAR have just gone, we don't want to make a decision. Just blow the whistle, blow the whistle, blow the whistle. Okay, good. We're done. We can't do anything now. We can't It was a massive dereliction of duty because it was a nailed on penalty. I think West Ham have every right to be absolutely fuming with that. But I don't know if you've seen Anel. Now I'm going to try and say his name properly. Anel Ahmedhodzic.
Yeah.
He's a low-key nutter. He's a low-key mental case. Now, have you seen what he tweeted after the game?
Yeah, I was going to bring this up.
He tweeted that BT or TNT Sports have edited the footage to make it look like it was a penalty when it wasn't actually a penalty. Now, how long do we give it before he's on a podcast with Matt Letizia? Because he sounds like he's right up the street. Like, Ben, you saw this.
Joey Barton,
and Joey Barton. Oh, he's been at it again today. It was a massive penalty, Ben. Like, there's no doubt whatsoever, right?
Yeah, definitely. With his tweet, it was so weird because, like you said, he was insinuating that they hadn't shown the correct footage or cut it off before Bowen was apparently grabbing him or whatever. And it was like, if you want to label that at the footage after the game, then fair enough. But during the game, everyone that was watching on TV all saw every single angle that they showed, and all the content was like, we couldn't. Me and my mates were sitting and watching it in the pub. It was like, how is that not a penalty? There's if you want to be really kind to him, there's like a little bit of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other at the start, a little bit. But Bowen's not grabbing him. He's just, it's just physical contact in the box. You're fighting for the space, and then he literally gets both arms on him and pulls him to the floor. It's just like ridiculous. And as well, like I thought West Ham were really hard done by on the penalty that they gave away as well. Like, I don't really know what Areola's actually supposed to do there. He was more. I've seen ones that, and actually, I think it's quite a good. I saw someone made a TikTok on this, and it's actually quite good that it seems like the Premier League, and we'll talk about it with Arsenal as well, with the second goal. I think Gabriel's second goal. About the fact that it feels like the Premier League almost they aren't being as lenient towards goalkeepers now in terms of, well, if you touch me, then it's a foul, and I just didn't like Areola's got every right to come for that. And that's why I found this kind of, it was almost like, given what we saw with James Trafford, obviously we talked about it last week, this decision felt a little bit hypocritical when it came to some of the decisions we've seen recently, especially as well I tweet this out, like when you reverse it back to the start of the season and look at what Onana did against Wolves.
Well, I was just about to say, have they seen that Onana decision and been like, right, we've seen the uproar about that, so now every time that happens, it's got to be a penalty now? Because I think it's a fairly contested ball. I love how Areola went off injured. I don't know if he was genuinely injured, but he went off injured. He definitely was like, no, that wasn't my fault. That wasn't my fault.
But also, like, McBurney's got like, there's another angle of it where McBurney's got his elbow in his face. It's just that, if McBurney's allowed to do that, then how Areola's got every right to come for that ball. It's a crowded penalty area. Like I thought West Ham were really hard done by. That was just not. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I think West Ham fan. My mate Tom, who's been on the pod a few times, was absolutely furious at the end of this at the end of this match. He didn't really talk much after it, and I don't blame him. But one moment we do need to talk about as well. Not only the fact that Maxwell Cornet scored a goal after his disaster class in the cup, but also Ben Brayton Diaz getting his first Premier League goal on his Premier League debut, and the fact that blew my mind the most, he's only 24 years old. I thought he was a lot older than that.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that.
But Adam, sorry, he took that chance really well, right? I think he could be a player that could be quite key for Sheffield United. I think that's a bit of shrewd business there.
It is. I think obviously he didn't have a great spell in La Liga with Villarreal, so obviously he's come in with an opportunity to actually make a name for himself again. Obviously, he came with a prolific record at Blackburn Rovers, was the talisman up there as well. And, you know, by all accounts, there was a few Premier League clubs. I remember Everton were kind of touted at the time looking at his services as well. So, you know, I think he can genuinely do a good job. Whether he's prolific enough to do it on a consistent basis is another thing. I think, you know, against better defenses, and that's no disrespect to West Ham, but I think better defenses might shut him out a lot more. But yeah, I mean, that could be the impetus for Sheffield United, especially when you look at Ryan Brewster and what he did as well in this match. I mean, that challenge, and I don't know whether he's actually a good player anymore. Like, there was that little bit of hype around him. I think everyone got hoodwinked by that spell at Swansea City. And that was under Steve Cooper, obviously, who had him in the England under-17s. I think that was the tournament that they won, wasn't it? And, you know, he's never really looked the same play. I mean, he had that spell in the Championship with Sheffield United, scored a lot of goals and then got injured. And so I think a lot of Sheffield United fans have a lot of time for him, but unfortunately, he's not been able to replicate that. And obviously, he's got to fix up his mindset if he's going to do challenges and lunches like that, because he's not going to last long.
Yeah, it looked like frustration and not being able to keep up with the game. Funnily enough, the only thing that comes up in my head when I think of Ryan Brewster is that video of him getting his hair cut with the Champions League winners medal around his neck. I'm pretty sure that's him. And it's just so shameless. I absolutely love it. That's the only thing that ever comes up when I think about it. But yeah, it was 2-2 in the end. Very, very frustrating, but absolute scenes, box office ending to this game. And Chris Wilder and David Moyes apparently had a pint after the game to argue about the penalty decisions, which is lovely. But we're going to move on from there, and we're going to go to playing well equals losing 4-0. I thought Bournemouth were actually pretty decent in this game. Ben, up until half-time, they were properly in it. Let's talk about Bournemouth first. The turnaround by Iraola and the way he's got his team playing, the fact that they were able to keep themselves in this game and keep Liverpool at bay, they're playing some really good stuff, right? They just couldn't get that final finishing touch.
Yeah, 4-0, like you kind of alluded to, I don't think was necessarily a fair reflection. I think Liverpool were just so much more clinical in the second half. I think there was a lot of Liverpool fans having a little bit of almost a meltdown at half time. I'm just like, how are we... They were getting overrun, they were getting outplayed. Like Bournemouth were very, very impressive and have been ever since. I mean, I think they sort of had their little bit of a turnaround in October, and then they kind of picked momentum up from there because they were struggling before that. But even then, you could sort of see the green shoots were there, and I wasn't worried about them for a second. Iraola has been such a shrewd appointment, and I'm sure we'll kind of get on to talking about Palace a little bit later because it feels like a similar situation in the sense that from the outside, everybody looked at Bournemouth and thought, well, why have they got rid of Gary O'Neill? He did really, really well to keep them up. Felt like he deserved a crack at a second season there. They were playing decent football, got some really big scalps on the way to keeping themselves in the league last year. And it feels like a similar situation with Palace, which we'll come on to. But Bournemouth showed that bit of ambition that I don't think a team like Crystal Palace have, and have gone out, saw the opportunity to get a better manager that was going to, you know, because it feels like with Bournemouth, like it feels like where Brighton are almost in this sort of little bit of, I mean, it's very harsh to say that Brighton are in a state of flux now after the heights they reached last season, but Brighton have established themselves as, you know, a top 10 Premier League team. But it feels like now there is an opportunity to grab that 8th or 7th place and maybe compete for Europe. And it feels like Bournemouth under Iraola could be that next team to do that. They're a really, really exciting side. Sorry,
but I was about to say, it reminds me, do you remember when Brighton sacked Chris Hughton when he kept him up and everyone went mad? Like, why have they sacked Chris Hughton? And they just replaced him with, I think, was it Potter that came in after him? And it was more ambitious. And it's the same thing, I think, that you look back now and you go, yeah, Gary O'Neill was harshly treated, but they've made a right decision. They've extended themselves a bit further down that path. They've pushed themselves a little bit further. So yeah, I think it's a really, really good appointment, and great to see for Bournemouth. So many good players. Was Justin Kluivert lucky to stay on the pitch, Adam? I think Jurgen Klopp was pretty angry about the fact that Curtis Jones got sent off for something very similar earlier in the season.
Yeah, potentially. I think there's an argument to say he was very lucky to stay on the pitch. So, yeah, I would say he was very lucky, but I think he didn't have a particularly great game himself, to be fair. And on that point about Bournemouth, whether they were unlucky in this match, I felt sometimes they were a bit too open in that middle part of the park, which just invited that kind of creativity from the likes of Elliott, for example, and Jota just took full advantage of that space as well. So, to an extent, I think that's the aspect that Areola maybe needs to just look and maybe just rethink about how he plays it against certain teams, because I know we're talking about being expansive and being creative, and I think that definitely helps in the Premier League, but I think sometimes you just need to shore it up against these teams, should I say. And I think they weren't doing too bad in that first half, as he alluded to, but second half it was almost like stamina had crept in. That's what it was.
Yeah, the second the first one went in, it was just a collapse, wasn't it? We have to say Liverpool were absolutely fantastic. My favourite moment was the Bournemouth fans going, way, when Jota did the air kick, and then he just absolutely spams it in a second later. I did enjoy that moment. But for Liverpool, we have to say, again, this is what great teams do. And in the absence of Salah, Jota and Darwin Núñez, again, his productivity is very, very high. Darwin Núñez, even though he's chaos, he's got a lot of goals and assists this season. I think it's 10 and 10 now, right? 10 goals and 10 assists this season, which is insane. Jota, again, I think he might be one of the better finishers in the league. I hate him because he always scores against Arsenal, but he got 2 again and an assist, or 2 assists, right? 2 goals and an assist, I think. Fantastic performance from him. Ben, Liverpool look like, you don't play well and you win 4-0. That is a worrying sign for the rest of the league, right?
Yeah, it's a sign of champions. That's what they say, isn't it? They feel a bit inevitable, Liverpool. It kind of feels like a little bit. They certainly feel, and obviously the problem was in those couple of years that they had Manchester City, just they could not reel them in. But now they've got the upper hand. It feels like they're on a real kind of bit of momentum now. And like you said, even when they're not playing well, that shows the importance of someone like Jota, because there's been so many games over the last couple of years since he arrived there where they haven't played well. Because the first season that Jota was there, they had that sticky season during COVID where they finished just inside the top 4.
Yeah.
And then obviously last season finished just outside the top 4. And then the season in between that, we're back to challenging Man City for the title. There's been so many games in that period where they've not played well and he's just popped up with a goal at the end, or like he's just such an efficient finisher, whether it's with his head, whether it's with both feet as well, which is so key. He's such an irritant to like defenders. He's just one of those players I imagine you'd hate to play against. Jota. And Núñez is the same, because Núñez is kind of the opposite. He's all chaos. And I think I saw something earlier that Núñez is the only player in the Premier League to have 10 plus goal contributions in the Premier League and in Europe, I think, as well.
Wow.
It was like something crazy. It might might not be right, but it felt that was what I read it as. But he just brings chaos. But I think he sort of brought a little bit more calm this week. Like both finishes from Núñez were really good. Both finishes from Jota were just ruthless as usual. And yeah, not at their best, but they do look. I thought this after the Arsenal Cup game. That I just thought that's a proper team now. Like it just feels like they're back a little bit. Something's kind of clicked again at Liverpool, and especially getting these players back. And especially as well, I think Salah's going to be out for a month now. Obviously, it's not the worst news in the world, because they probably anticipated to lose him for at least 3 weeks anyway with the AFCON. And the fact that he's back at Liverpool doing rehab, there's a chance that he could maybe get back sooner than that. And obviously, we're a week or so deep into AFCON now as well. So, they're probably not going to lose him for longer than they thought they were going to anyway. So then Salah just comes straight back in. But the fact they've got so many options across that forward line who are also effective, productive, and efficient is just scary for the rest of the league. And I know Liverpool fans always say that it could be their year, but
it could be their year.
They'll leave with something, because they're probably the favourites for Europa League. With not to big up Spurs, but Spurs and Man City are playing each other in the FA Cup, so one team will go out there, so they'll fancy their chances in the FA Cup as well. League Cup, you'd imagine that they'll get to the final and beat Fulham, and then the Premier League as well, and they're 5 points clear of City still. So yeah, it's looking good for them.
It's quietly a very good season. But Adam, I wanted to also say that this is without Trent Alexander-Arnold and without Andy Robertson, right? These are two absolutely massive players. They don't even have their second choice left back. They're playing Joe Gomez at left back.
Yeah, exactly.
Connor Bradley at right back was fantastic. Klopp was absolutely going mad about him post-game. So it shows also that the players that aren't necessarily starting every single game can come in and just know exactly what their job is. And Ibrahim Konate this season has been unreal. I've always had my doubts about him, but I think him and Van Dijk this season have really stepped up again. Like they're building on a solid defense, right?
Yeah, 100%. And you allude to that agility that players able to come and jump in those positions and do the job. I'm still a bit suspects about Joe Gomez. I think there's an opportunity that he can be done on the turn, and I think he gets easily turned sometimes. So I think there is still that kind of weak points potentially. But yeah, Sonny Bradley, I mean, what he's been able to do recently, just fill in and just make it seem seamless at times. I think that is the impressive bit for Liverpool fans. And I think to a degree, I think the fact that you got Curtis Jones in such a rich reign of form going forward at the moment has helped protect that line as well. So it's taking off a lot of pressure off that defence now. And I appreciate it's only Bournemouth, but still, against the better sides, I think that's where that form carries on. And I think that's really promising for Klopp as well as Liverpool, because he's able to have a player that's now blossoming. He's actually starting to grip with actually what his responsibilities are if he wants to become a kind of first 11 choice as well. So, you know what? I think, there's definitely the foundations there. And as you rightly allude to, Ibrahim Konate is doing really well in considering Joel Matip is probably the preferred partner for Van Dijk, but actually I think his age is caught up now. So, that's a great opportunity for Konate to make it his own position now. And you probably would say you're going to struggle to find many kind of areas that Liverpool have to improve on when everyone's fit. I mean, that is just going to be an incredible squad. And who do you leave out? That's going to be a big question now going forward.
Yeah, well, it's a nice decision for Klopp to have to wrestle. I did also enjoy the Bournemouth bench just to finish outwardly laughing at him as he was complaining. You could just see all the bench just laughing in his face. I really did enjoy that, but he was getting quite worked up on the line as he often does. But we'll leave Bournemouth and Liverpool there, and we will finish with Martinelli, wheel up. It was so good the first time. He had to run it back and do it again. 2 identical goals at the end. Palace absolutely threw in the towel towards the end, but Arsenal 5, Palace 0. Arsenal scored a goal in open play, which is absolutely delightful. But I'm not actually going to talk about Arsenal that much because I think it was a fairly routine win. It was nice to see Trossard score. Great to see Martinelli double his tally for the season. Hopefully he can continue from there. But all the story here is about Roy and about Palace. Now, Roy's post-match press conference was quite interesting. He was complaining about the first 2 corners, said without those, the game goes very differently. I would be keen to get your view on that, Ben, because I think the first goal was absolutely fine. The second one, I can see what he's trying to get at, but I'm very biased and think it's fine. I think if Palace score that against me, I'm not particularly annoyed.
Yeah, I completely agree. The first one, it's funny where Gary Neville. Did you see what Gary Neville tweeted about the Gabriel against Newcastle, where he was saying about I thought Arsenal fans were moaning, but I think the point he was trying to make that he didn't think either of them were a foul, which is kind of still where I sit, even though that was months ago. But with that one, that's a good header. That's a good centre-back header from a corner. Nothing wrong with that at all. Second one, again, I feel absolutely fine with it because I felt for so long, like we were talking about earlier, obviously the opposite case for Areola. He was unfortunate, but I think goalkeepers have been given far too much protection. I think it's good that referees are sort of starting to almost feel like it's going the other way, but maybe it's just a case of those particular decisions. But I didn't feel there was anything wrong with that at all, really, to be honest. I can see where he's coming from, but again, I think he's just clinging on to something there, Roy. It all just feels a bit sad at Palace, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a bit grim,
it feels like they need to. He shouldn't have been there in the first place. They should have brought in a progressive manager in the summer. Because when you look at their squad, they've got some of the most exciting players in the league. Eze, Elise, I really like Czech Decore. They've got a really good they've got a really good centre back partnership, and they've got good. Crystal Palace have always notoriously had a good academy, bringing players through. So it just felt like it was. I think again, it's sort of similar to what we were talking about with Bournemouth. It's like fans on behalf of your club telling you how you should feel and that you should be grateful to still be in this position when we're talking about the Palace protest and all that kind of stuff. And I remember in February, March last year, whenever it was, that Vieira got sacked and they brought in Hodgson again. And it was almost like, from the outside point of view, everyone was like, well, it's not a bad appointment to keep you in the Premier League, keep you stable, and then you go on in the summer. But Palace fans didn't want him then either. They were very respectful of what he had done, but they saw it as a backward step, even though it was a pragmatic appointment to try and keep them in the league. And they have every right to feel like that, because for me, I made a video about it after the game, because it was just that their protest resonated so much with me, because it was like, you're, as a football fan, you're constantly kind of told how you should feel about your football club from the outside. And it's like, sometimes, we've had it to a far lesser extent this season where people almost feel that insecurity on behalf of you around, Postecoglou and all these injuries and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, we don't care. Like, we're enjoying this ride, and it's like, you can't tell us how to feel. And Palace, it's a whole nother level where it's like, you should be grateful. You've been a Premier League club for 10 years, all this kind of stuff. But if you've been a Premier League club for 10 years, you expect that a bit more. You expect a level of ambition to be shown, especially with the players that they have had come and go at Palace. They're lucky that, Eze signed a new contract in the summer. Obviously, at least you feel like will probably move on. At least one of those two won't be there. And I think it's just that when I was talking about Bournemouth earlier, and I felt that it feels like in the Premier League there is always there's this revolving door when it comes to like that last European place in terms of who finishes 7th, or depending on what happens in the FA Cup, who finishes 8th. 8th can grab a European spot, and it's felt there's been so many seasons where Palace should have been that team to latch onto that and make that theirs. And I think a lot of Palace fans feel that frustration as well. Obviously, they're looking at Steve Cooper and Graham Potter. There's been some rumours about Potter today being spotted in a cab with Mark Bright. I don't know how true that is. Who knows? But I feel like either of those two, for like different reasons, are both very sensible appointments for Palace. And it feels like the appointment they should have made a year ago, or 6 months, or this time last year, basically when Vieira got sacked. Obviously, Potter was in a job at that point with Chelsea, and Cooper was in a job. But you're not. I don't feel like they're going to have another opportunity now with those two managers both free, because there'll be managers, especially with Potter. I think there'll be foreign clubs maybe looking to bring him in. He was rumoured with Lyon, I think, at one point. Cooper is one of the most sought after young British managers. So is Potter. So it's like, this is their opportunity now to say to Roy, thanks for everything. And it felt like sometimes you go to a football game and you walk away having that feeling, knowing it's the end of something. Like, I've been there at Spurs. I'm sure you've both been there, where it's like, that's the end. And it felt very much like that on Saturday. But I feel for Palace fans. I feel like they've kind of been in a state of flux for like a few years. And I think if it wasn't for some of the teams below, and again, it's sort of this season, they could find themselves being dragged into a relegation battle if they're not careful. So I think they have to act now. And they were down to the bare bones a bit on Saturday as well. That I tweeted out before the game, that front six, I was like, someone needs to save a Berries, and Jesus Christ, because that
it's not inspiring. It's not inspiring. No. I think Mateta's a really interesting one, because he's physical, he's enormous, he's fast. Everything about him says that he should be awkward, but he just does sod all. And you're like, okay, so like bad. Gabriel and Saliba they did well against him, but they had a very easy evening or afternoon against him. But I think, Adam, for Palace fans, it is just that lack of ambition, right? Because I think even the banner wasn't directly aimed at Roy. It wasn't like no. It was definitely aimed at the board, right? And we've talked in the group about where they should be going. Like, do you think it is just the least ambitious club in the Premier League because they've been around for a while?
Look, I think if you talk to that kind of ownership, because that is Steve Parish, isn't it, who was part of the consortium that saved them from the brink of destruction. Essentially, at the time, there's a really great documentary about Eagles Dare to Live, or I can't remember what the title is, but essentially he talks a lot really openly about how that happens, and the circumstances as well. He bought the club for £1, invested millions alongside his kind of directors and so on, and they were just fans at the end of the day. They didn't really know how to run a club. I think they've come to a point where they've stabilized for so long, and now the ambitions is just to stay in the Premier League, because they know how much funds it requires for you to go back up if you do get relegated. And obviously they've invested quite a lot in the infrastructure. They're planning a new kind of stand build as well. So they need to be ultimately staying in the Premier League to sustain that. But at the same time, I do completely get why Crystal Palace fans feel the way they do as well, because I've seen a lot of the content. Obviously, Ben really retweeted something that I'd listened earlier in the day, which was the lab where he'd obviously been on the podcast, and the classic, obviously, Crystal Palace fan account, Hopkins curls it in the top corner.
Love that.
He talks about it really extensively to the point of Brown's Crystal Palace. And I haven't listened to it all. I haven't been able to listen to it all, but I listened to about a good half an hour of the chunk, and you can kind of get the angst and the anger around how they've kind of gone about it, because Roy is a pair of safe hands. You know, Steve Parish even admitted at the time it's sometimes easier to bring in someone that you know, and that's the problem. I feel like they were ambitious when they got in Vieira, but they didn't necessarily back him to the full hill. I felt like there was still an opportunity to get more out of Vieira, and as well as the kind of players that maybe he could have attracted. I mean, don't forget, before Vieira came, obviously Roy Hodgson was there and the football was really stagnant. They got rid of about 20 odd players. So it was going to take time for Vieira to get in a philosophy and everything working. And I think what really came to light was the fact that Crystal Palace fan, not just that account, but also others have said, look, we know we're not going to be competing with your likes of Man United, but there was a style of football that we could accept, which was fighting, competitive. You know, we've got our tricky wingers, but we want to ultimately see success. We can see our rivals, Brighton, who are in Europe. They are actually doing something about it. They look like they're ambitious, and they've got a solid foundation as a club as well. That's what they aspire to be, at least competing with the likes of Brighton. They see there's an opportunity. And I think all of us as neutrals, we actually see Crystal Palace as almost like a second team. You like the look of that team. You like their players. Like, I love about 5 of their players. I would love to jump into any other club, but for some reason they just can't instill this. So yeah, there is a bit of blame to Sean Parrish or Steve Parish even, but for me, I just think there's a combination of different things you have to consider. And I think obviously Steve Parish is going down that safe route, but I believe from a footballing philosophy, I would be like you guys. I wouldn't have kept with obviously Roy. I'd have changed it some time ago. And yeah, I think he just needs to be on the beach, like Rio Ferdinand said. He shouldn't be at the stadium, should he?
Man, just relax. Yeah. Put your feet up. You've had a great career. Just relax and get. It was really sad seeing him look at that banner when he's like a Palace fan, and you're like, it was just a really, really sad sight. But I think also the apathy from the American owners, because it's John Textor, right? The guy who owns Botafogo, maybe, or Santos, I can't remember. And their kind of apathy, and there's a lot of like discontent amongst the fans with them just not putting the investment that they promised and not having that ambition. But yeah, hopefully they make a decision. I feel like with Roy, they really tried to have a new direction with Vieira and just chickened out of it. And we're like, no, and just absolutely shat themselves. And now they've gone back to square one again. But yeah, Steve Cooper, Graham Potter, either would be very, very good appointments. I think I would really like to see Steve Cooper there. I'll be honest. I would really like to see
that'd be
Steve
great.
Cooper there. So fingers crossed for Palace fans. Again, they are only 5 points above the relegation zone, 1 win in the last 5. It's time to act now. I think I was honestly surprised that we didn't wake up to the news that Roy had been sacked, to be honest. I thought it would have been this morning. But, you know, Steve Parish must have been waiting for us to do this pod. They'll announce it tomorrow, right? But we will leave the Premier League there, and we're going to go to Serie A. Unfortunately, we can only start in one place, and it is up in Udine. Thankfully, Milan won, but no one really gave a crap ultimately. Another incident of racism in Serie A. One that's actually been reported. It happens every week in Serie A, but this one caught the headlines because, of course, the game was postponed for 10 minutes as the Milan players refused to play. It's the scenes you want to see, really, in terms of their reaction, right? And weirdly, Infantino's tweet is like actually pretty ballsy. Like, it's the first time anyone said anything of any substance, where he said games need to be forfeited and points need to be deducted and stadiums need to be closed. And you think, okay, Gianni, that's fantastic. Love the sentiment. Get on the phone and talk to your mates at Lega and at Serie A and see if you can actually implement this, because it's about time something happens. Like, between my experiences in Italian football stadiums, mainly the San Siro, but it happens every game. There is always some dickhead or some group of dickheads who do it. And I think Mike Magnan's tweet was really, really good in how he tackled it and how he kind of voiced it. I think my only problem is when I've been in the stadium, it is very difficult to say something when you see people doing it, right? Because I've wanted to turn around to people and be like, oi, shut the fuck up. But I also don't want to get my teeth kicked in. So I think what we actually need is the authorities to step up, because there's only so much personal responsibility one person can take. Like, we need the authorities to step in and do something. I find it really annoying because it just ruins the image of Italian football every time it happens. Like, we all love Italian football here, and we're all just sick to death of it happening. We're like, this country's got so many problems, and it's obviously in the football stadium. But Adam, were you happy to see the reaction of the Milan players at least? Do you think they should have just refused to play the rest of it? Should the ref have got involved? Like, Udinese's statement was pretty pathetic as well, really.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because obviously you all have different feelings about it, different sentiments, and I'm not going to say that it's right or wrong, really. I think we've had it so many times that players of that ethnicity must be like pulling their hair out and going, nothing seems to work these days. Like you say, I think your words were spot on, to be fair. It's all about the actions, and there's a lack of actions. We know with Serie A, they don't seem to do much about it. And you look at a few years ago, their campaign against racism, it was just laughable. And that was a really sore point at the time anyway, when you saw that kind of mocked up. I mean, how it got signed off, I don't know.
That was the pictures of the monkeys, right? It was the pictures of the monkeys. Yeah,
it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And what did they think they were going to achieve by just doing that? Is just horrific to even remind ourselves of that moment. But look, great on them to have the composure to just go through that and, you know, get the victory at the end of the day. I mean, it wasn't easy as well. Udinese were doing quite well in the match itself. So for them to overcome that as well, you know, they were putting a lot of pressure in the last 10 minutes against Udinese's defence as well as their goalkeeper. And fair play to Jovic and Okafor, who got the winner in the end. Giroud seems to be just on a mission. And you know what? What was really touching was what you saw of Yassin Adli. As soon as that third goal went in, he just went straight to Mike Maginan, just celebrated the goal with him, which I thought was beautiful. And you could see even the players at the end, they were just all with him, and that was beautiful. So full strength to Mike Maginan. He deserves it. But like you say, I'm reluctant to say we've seen the last of it. I feel there's still a lot more that can be done. And like you say, needs to also happen from an authority's point of view in the stadiums. They need to be there just kicking these idiots out of the game, unfortunately, because that's how you're going to start kind of setting that trend. And I know, like, obviously we've had the Infantino quotes, but like you say, he needs to start putting pressurization on these kind of organizations. Look, how many times did the Eastern European teams get like chucked out of Europe because they keep on doing racist abuse or chanting, etc.? But nothing seems to come of it. They just carry on in the same vein. And this is the same situation with Italian football. They need to address these issues really head on, and just they seem to shy away from it, or just like to brush it under the carpet, just say something will be done. But you know, it's just such a weird time as well. Udinese as well. They've got a history of like having, you know, mixed kind of ethnicity players. They've got a few in their squad. I mean, they're probably hoping that they score goals for their side. So it's just such a weird mentality they've got.
Well, did you see Paolo Di Canio's quote about this?
Oh God!
So he said, "I'm a fascist, not a racist," which is a fucking fantastic quote. But he said that he would have got the black players from Udinese saw success and and got them under the curva and been like, look, you cheer for these guys. Why? And it's like, oh God, I'm so confused by you, Di Canio, whether you are like the hero here or the villain. I can't figure him out. But yeah, you're right. There's never any brains behind this. And I've heard Inter fans behind me say it when someone has there's been a comment where they've booed like or made monkey noises at someone, and someone said, oh, well, Lukaku's black or whatever. And like, oh yeah, but he plays for us. I was like, that's literally the line that they draw it at. And I've had conversations with friends in bars where they're like, no, it's not racist. We're just trying to get a reaction out of them. We just know that that'll make them angry. That's the only way. That's what we can say to them that will put them off their performance. So whatever you need to say to justify your racism, mate, is up to you, but it's fucking racism. And I think there's just like a lot more apologism here and a lot more like laughing it off. Like we were talking about on the group as well, the head of the Lega who said horrific things about women and black men and everything within the football, and he was promoted. He wasn't fired. Like nobody said anything. Like so, I think it all just gets laughed off here, unfortunately. But Ben, in terms of what Infantino said, let's talk about it. Points deductions, closing stadiums. Now we've talked about how fans shouldn't be all fans shouldn't be punished. But do you think that it would take something like that? That like, I'm sorry if you're a fan who isn't racist, but you have racist fans, you're just going to have to take the punishment.
Yeah, it's such a strange one, that, because it's like it feels like something extreme has to be done for this to be, because the sad reality is we're probably going to be doing a podcast in a year's time where we're talking about exactly the same thing. And that just shows that this is never going to go away. Some people, the people that do these kind of things, you're never going to be able to change them. Like it's just because we've sat and had the same conversation for like the last 5 or 6 years, and actions need to be taken to stop them from doing that. How extreme do you go? It needs to be as extreme as possible, because these players, you've seen it with, how many times have you seen it with Vinicius Jr. in Spain as well? Like
that's horrific as well.
And like with him, especially with Vinicius Jr., it's like he gets made out to be the victim, and like the support that comes from La Liga isn't there. It's almost they're kind of blaming Vinicius Jr. for provoking them. And you've kind of seen that, you know, that's kind of a rhetoric that goes back to like the 80s when people were throwing bananas on the pitch. It's like, well, you know, it's them, they started it, they provoked it, because, you know, you've seen it in the past, a lot of black players tend to be sometimes like, or the stereotype has been that sometimes they are flamboyant and they provoke these situations, which is just absolute bollocks. But you would never label that at, I don't know, I can't think of an example, but like Cantona was flamboyant, provocative, but it was never about him being French or white, was it? Yeah, he was seen as he's labelled as a maverick, whereas like Vinicius Jr. is labelled as someone who provokes someone. And obviously with Magnan as well, it's like, you know, I was so pleased that Milan did that, because it's down to, and I think it's very difficult to say as well whether they did the right thing coming back off, or they should have just left the game, because at the end of the day it's like down to them. If they feel like as a team they want to go back out on the pitch, and the best way they feel to silence these people is by going out there and winning the game, that's good. Like, all power to you. That's exactly the right, if you feel like that's the right thing to do, that is 100% the right thing to do, because you've made that decision. It shouldn't be forced upon you to do what you want. If you want to walk off the pitch and not come back, perfect, like brilliant, it's your power. In terms of how you punish it's nowhere near as bad in England, but I remember an incident last year where I was at a Spurs FA Cup game and we were playing Portsmouth, and there was a guy next to me who was saying all this stuff about Son, and it's like, you're a Tottenham fan. Like, all the typical stuff that you would imagine that gets labelled at Korean players, like the same stuff that Ji-sung Park had to put up with for years. Right, yeah. You know, the stuff that Son was subject to when we played Millwall in the FA Cup. But that was from the opposing fans, who would sit there and argue that, oh, no, like you said, when you've been at Inter, it's like, well, we try and do it to provoke players. It's what we do to get in their head. We're not racist. It's like you said, if you need to say that to justify your racism, then that's just ridiculous. But Spurs have a thing, and I'm pretty sure all clubs probably have it, where you can, because like you said, he was next to me, but he was this typical, it was like a hard geezer, like Tottenham fan. I'm there with my girlfriend. I'm not going to turn around and say, like, "Oi, mate, what the fuck are you doing?" Yeah. But Spurs have like a thing where you can report it via text. You can give your seat number, all this kind of stuff. I did that. Had a conversation with someone over text it dragged over the period of like 2 months, and then I just got no response after that. And it was just like, you need to. I've given you the seat number. Like, you can. Yeah. This is the reason why, like, these clubs now, like with Spurs, you can't. The idea is that you can't, and it's the same for most Premier League clubs. It's like, you can't transfer. Well, there's ways around it, but like, if you transfer a ticket to someone, it has to be, it's either through the ticket exchange or through the ticket exchange. So it's like, it's traceable back to whoever was sat in that seat is responsible for the actions that were taken or the behavior that was initiated by whoever is there. So if that was my seat and I sold that on to someone, it would be my responsibility. But that is then traceable back to the person that bought it, because you have to have a membership account and all these things to be able to go to matches. And it just kind of feels like, well, what is the point of all this stuff if it's not going to, if I've done that and I've reported it and we've not gone anywhere and this person's not been banned or not been, it's just ridiculous. You've got all these CCTV cameras. This was the point of all this stuff, to stop this from happening. But it's just not happening. It's not taken anywhere seriously enough, whether it's in the Premier League, Serie A, La Liga. It's just, and it's never going to change if you treat it like that. And like you said, it's all well and good if Infantino. I thought, you know, his statement made for positive reading, because you thought, well, this is what we want to see. But words are nothing without action, and we need to see either teams being punished, because at the end of the day, You know, we've seen teams punished for things that they're, you know, teams have been kicked out of European competitions before, like for things like Heysel and things like that in the past. Like, you know, Tottenham were kicked out of the FA Cup for however long because of how our fans acted. You know, we've seen all these things before. Like, you need to punish because the responsibility is on you as an individual not to be a fucking racist piece of shit. But the sad reality is that, unfortunately, as much
there's always going to be racist pieces of shit. Yeah,
and it only takes one person as well. It only takes one person to say these things out of a 40,000 seat stadium. One racist is a racist, and it's just it's a horrible situation. And you know, all power to Mike Maginan and the AC Milan team who all got behind him. But like you said, the reality of it is that, and I've experienced as well. It's not just about the opposition. It's sometimes people directing it towards their own players as well. Yeah. And we live in a very fucked up situation in society if that's what's happening in football, because football is reflective of society as well. So completely,
every issue that we see in society, you see in football. And I think the really damning thing is that, like, Spurs have got that amazing kind of thing set up where you can text someone, you can say this is happening, you can do that. Serie A doesn't even have that. People don't sit in their seats; they just go where they want, right? Yeah. Like, I've never even looked at my seat number in the San Siro. You just go, "Oh, there's a seat. I'll sit there." So, like, there's not even the basics of that to try and tackle it. Like, and the thing that's always laid out is like, the stadiums are so old. Like, and the San Siro is fucking old and it's like decrepit, and most of the stadiums are. But the Udinese stadium is fucking brand new.
It's nice,
yeah. The Juventus stadium is fucking brand new. These are two stadiums where there's been high-profile racist incidents. It doesn't cost much to hire two people to put in the cameras, whatever it is, to be the clubs that are the first to take that step, to be like, we're going to be the ones that go through that door first and take a hard line on this and say that we're going to kick out fans, we're going to identify them, and we're going to implement this. Because the second they do that, other clubs have to do it. Otherwise, they look bad. They look bad. And I think, obviously, like, is it up to Juve and Udinese to solve racism? No, but it's up to them to solve it in their stadium and try and be proactive. If they know the league isn't going to do it, then they need to do it themselves. And I think it just happens to be the two most up-to-date stadiums that there's been high-profile cases in recently. Just really, really fucking depressing. And it's... Look, I can talk about the state of Italy for another hour, but this country is only going one way, and we're seeing it in the stadiums. Unfortunately. But fantastic win for Milan. It keeps them in the European race. Okafor getting another winner. He had a bit of a slow start to his Milan career, Adam, but he's off the bench. He's doing big things. He's having big impacts.
He's starting to grow, isn't he? He's starting to grow. And I think, obviously, it probably has rubbed off on him that, he's learning from the likes of Giroud and potentially, to a lesser extent, maybe Zlatan, who's obviously now in a different capacity, but he seems to be much more embedded with the players as well. So, again, that's just going to rub off on him. We know what a raw talent he is from his early days at Salzburg as well. So, look, Champions League experience there as well. And, he's come into this side. And look, he might kick on now. He's got competition in Jovic, who's scoring goals as well. So, that kind of intensity is probably welcomed at Milan at the moment, because they haven't had much to cheer on in recent months. But the fact that they're starting to get a groove, they're starting to be a bit more consistent with the results. And, they've got a gritty win here as well, it's fair to say, because, Samajic, I thought it was incredible for Udinese. Yeah. He just, the goal, he could have followed it up afterwards as well with the same replica of that goal as well. The guy is talented. He's not going to stay at Udinese for very much longer.
Yeah, he's been linked with Napoli, right? They're apparently after him. I don't know if the signing of Ingonge makes a difference in terms of, like, financially, if they can go and get Samajic as well. But they have been linked with him. Obviously, Inter came very close to him in the summer. So, you wouldn't expect him to stick around for much longer. Florian Thauvin getting a goal as well. We were so excited when he came into the league. He's not really done much.
Not done anything.
He's starting to pop up with a few. So that's quite nice to see. But we're going to move on from the Milan game there, I think. And we're going to go to De Rossi has a flying start at Roma. Instantly forget about Mourinho. A lovely goal from Lukaku. When he's good, he's good. And Roma managed to get a win. Is this a promising sign for Roma, Ben? Do you think this is the perfect start for De Rossi, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels like the perfect move as well, or perfect appointment, because we've seen it so many times where clubs kind of go through this tumultuous period. You have no idea where you're going under a manager. You feel very disillusioned, etc., etc. But as soon as you bring in someone that's kind of got that connection to the club, and I don't think you'll find, him and Francesco Totti. Obviously, it's both related to Roma, but I don't think you'll find two players, De Rossi being one of them, that have been that devoted to their football club. Some of the quotes that we were talking about in the group, like that De Rossi has said about players in the dressing room, and all those kind of things. Like if you're a manager, if you're a fan of a club, that kind of whether De Rossi has credentials as a manager is remains to be seen. Obviously, he's got off to the perfect start, but the fact that that attitude and that kind of charisma that he embodies, and it's like having a fan on the touchline. So instantly, if you're looking for a new manager, bounce, and the players will feel that as well. Like how it's kind of that sort of stereotype of Italian football, but how passionate the fans are. How passionate the players can be. That obviously rubs off on the squad and the managers as well. And I think De Rossi is kind of the perfect appointment, even if it is a stopgap towards the end of the season or not. We'll see, or whether they keep him for next year. I'm not sure what the contract was, but
it's only if he gets them into the Champions League as like a trigger for an extra year, I think.
Right. Okay. And I mean that feels unlikely,
ambitious.
But, very ambitious. But it's a step. I think it's a step in the right direction. I think maybe other than Chelsea, I think many clubs have seen firsthand what Mourinho can do to a club. Even though Roma, the send off that they gave him was unbelievable, and obviously regardless of the kind of the way he has almost he is responsible for a lot of what Roma have become, but at the same time he delivered them their first ever European trophy and all that kind of thing, and they do have a lot to thank him for. And those scenes to see were great because it shows that there can be a relationship between a player and a manager. And although Mourinho is this kind of this egomaniac that people perceive him to be, it shows that he is a human at the end of the day. And I think everyone can appreciate a little bit of Jose. Football doesn't quite feel the same without him. But De Rossi, I think,
it might not be long till he's back. I'll be honest.
I'll get on to
that. He's never away for long. He's never away for long.
I remember seeing that video. Was it on Sky Sports News where he got sacked for? Was it Man United he got sacked from? And then he was like, they were interviewing him in the street, and he just started like breaking down, crying because he missed football so much. It was just like,
guy needs this.
That was me after. That was me when he got to the end at Tottenham. I was like breaking down. I don't want to watch football again. I had this argument constantly with like Spurs fans about whether Spurs were right to sack Mourinho before the League Cup final and all this kind of stuff. And I still stand by that we did the right thing by getting him out when we did, even though it was a chance at a final. But I think De Rossi is it's perfect. It's perfect for now. See how we go. The pressure's kind of off Roma towards the end of the season now, and that's the good thing that those kind of appointments do have sometimes. Like, again, if we're talking club legend status, I'm not for one second comparing Ryan Mason to Daniele De Rossi. But as an example that relates to my own club, like you've seen it, when you bring in someone like that who gets it, who has played for the club, all that kind of stuff, towards the end of obviously there's a long way to go, to be fair, but it does kind of take that pressure off a little bit because you want to get behind the manager, and that's probably not a feeling that Roma have felt towards Mourinho for a long time. So it kind of helps build bridges for whatever the next step of their rebuild is going to be, and we'll see likely in the summer who that's going to be. But I think in the short term, it's a good appointment, decent performance against Verona. I think it's smart.
Yeah, no, I think it's the perfect start. But Adam, we've talked about it. He's got a few easier games to kick off his reign, right?
Yes,
and Verona at home is a game you should definitely win, but they won it fairly comfortably. Obviously, Folarinho gets a goal late on, but it never really looked like Verona were going to get back into it, I think. But was there anybody who stood out for you for Roma? I think El Shaarawy's work for the first goal was fantastic. And I think Pellegrini, it's the first time since I've seen Pellegrini on the score sheet for a while.
Yes, it has been. I think that in part of it, that was to do with the formation because he went with 4 in the back, which obviously is stark contrast to the Mourinho style, which was 3 at the back and obviously relying on wing backs. So there's a lot more narrow in the kind of midfield attacking area, and maybe he saw that as the opportunity to exploit, especially Hellas Verona, given they've kind of sold a lot of their better players. But yeah, I think we saw the very best of Pellegrini. I know Joe Spagnoli's just actually written that in the chat as well. But we saw the best of him. Spinazzola being introduced back as well, I think in a more natural position for him, which is always welcome for Roma fans as well. But otherwise, yeah, I suppose there was not too many surprises. The only surprise maybe was Rui Patricio letting in that effort, because although it was a bit of a banger from distance, you know, it had a little bit of curve to it. I think he should do better personally. That's my kind of instincts anyway on that one.
He's not a very good goalkeeper, Rui Patricio. I just don't think he's very good.
No. One other thing that I was going to say is completely slipped my mind now. But yeah, Juric, the Zlatan Ibrahimovic lookalike, could have made it a bit tighter because he missed a penalty as well. So yeah, there's things to work on, let's put it that way, for De Rossi. But the fact that he's starting to implement a different style, which is probably more appeasing to the Roma fan base, potentially those that are a bit more apathetic to the style of football, then yeah, I think that's going to be pleasing for Roma fans. But Joe probably will tell us otherwise.
For Verona, it was a bad weekend. A few teams around them picked up results, and that is just adding to the fact that they've got a mass exodus. Josh Doig, of course, leaving this week as well, and Gonj, of course, going. It's rough times up in the northeast of Italy. But let's move on and let's go for. We need to talk about Juve. They've finished their winning games 1-0 period, and they're starting to score a lot of goals. They're starting to score a lot of goals, guys. It feels like the attack is really clicking. Now, Vlahovic gets 2 here. I am personally slighted for Weston McKennie because he was in my Fantacalcio team and he had a goal stolen off him, and I got battered this weekend. So I'm just as angry as you, Weston. I'm just as angry as you. But Vlahovic is really, really coming into form now. And yeah, the Juve attack is clicking. Adam, this looks, they've gone top of Serie A. There's a lot of pressure on Inter's game in hand, which I believe is against Atalanta. This is a huge win.
Huge win for Juventus at times in the first half. It didn't look like it was going to be that straightforward because I thought Lecce were quite attacking. It's fair to say I think they were a bit unlucky with some of the decisions as well, because Amphis, for example, goes down, which I think on another day gets given as a penalty. Personally, there was the kick out by Vlahovic. Yes, it was
bleeding from
on
his
one
face.
Yeah. Just because obviously I've forgotten the defender. This was Rahmani. He's headering down, and then Vlahovic's foot is so close to his head. I mean, like, that's karate chop-esque, isn't it? You can't have your foot that high up. But apart from that, you know, it was just clinical Juventus at the end of the day. Dusan Vlahovic takes his chances very well. He was goaded by the defenders for the majority of this match, so it's kind of last laugh, he gets it. But as you say, Weston McKennie's face was quite funny because obviously he didn't know whether to strangle Vlahovic or actually celebrate with him. Even at the point that all his teammates are celebrating with Dusan Vlahovic, he still doesn't know what to do. So that was quite funny. But yeah, Juventus putting a lot of pressure on Inter now because, you know, by maintaining this kind of form, I've seen some mad stats as well about Juventus. So this is the most goals they've started to a calendar year in over a century. That was a really random stat. Obviously, Dusan Vlahovic has now scored 5 goals in the last 7. And he's the second player for Juventus to score double in 2 consecutive games. The other player was Paulo Dybala. And yeah, Max Allegri has now, I believe, as a manager at Juventus,
300 wins,
created the most wins, goals, and obviously the most stringent defense ever for Juventus history as well. So just some mad stats about Juventus. This could be their season. They are
quite good.
It's just incredible.
They are quite good.
And they play shit. That's the problem.
Well, I was just looking. They've scored 18 goals in their last 5 games. So yeah, since January the 4th, which was their first game of the year, 18 goals. Now, obviously, there's a 6-1 there's 8 goals alone just against Salernitana, but 18 goals in 5 games is still impressive. And I think, with that lineup, the front line, even Yildiz as well, is a really exciting product.
He's incredible.
Like, it just... And then you've got Sule. We're going to get onto him for Frosinone. He's going to be coming into that team next year. I still think... Maybe I'm looking at him a lot because he's in my Fantacalcio team. I still want more from Kostic. I still feel like Kostic isn't as productive as he should be. He's not getting the assists. It felt like he was getting a few more goals last year, a few more assists last year. This year, he's not quite living up to it. But that midfield as well. And we've had a request from Jose Tellez to actually give some credit to Weston McKennie. Now, Premier League fans and Leeds fans I can hear them screaming already. It feels like a long time ago since he was kind of half-arsed wandering around Ellen Road. He's having a very, very good season. He's a player that I've always liked. I've just not been quite sure what he is. We were talking on the group chat about it. Like, I'm not sure. He's not a defensive midfielder. He's not like his defensive work isn't good enough, but attacking-wise, he doesn't get enough goals or assists. But that box-to-box midfielder, he's very busy. He puts himself about. I think he does win the ball. I'm not quite sure what type of midfielder suits him best. Like, Ben, from his Leeds days, isn't fair to judge him, but from what you've seen of him, there is a player in there, right? And this year he is doing very well.
He's one of the most confusing players I think I've come across in the Premier League and Serie A in the last few years, because I feel like in the Premier League, if you're not, I feel like because of the way that everyone's so obsessed these days with like goals and assists and everything's very stats driven, it's like Weston McKennie just felt like he was never going to work in the Premier League, especially in that team, because it was like, well, what does he actually do?
Yeah.
Like what? Yeah, I feel like to be a midfielder in the Premier League that isn't necessarily a proper defensive midfielder or a box-to-box midfielder that's contributing in terms of whether it's output in terms of goals and assists or just the amount of ground covered, all that kind of stuff, metrics that will actually reflect your performance or back up your performance. It feels like you have to be a very, very good player to get away with that in the Premier League these days, but mainly I think that's been driven by perception by fans because of how football's changed over the last even 5 or 6 years, let alone the last 10 or so years. But he, being honest, he didn't impress me at Leeds. But then it was like that was a very hard team to go into and sort of make an impact, because I think Jesse Marsch, I mean, you would have thought that he would have thrived under Jesse Marsch, given but again, maybe that's a lazy comparison in the sense that, it's the American coach and all that kind of stuff. But you would have thought that it kind of felt like it made sense. I remember when Tottenham were linked with McKennie before he went to Leeds, and it just felt a little bit like, well, what does he actually do?
Yeah.
Can't really quantify it. Wasn't massively impressed with performances at the World Cup either for USA. But he's having a brilliant season. And again, like with the goal that Vlahovic robbed him off of, it was Jermaine Defoe and David Nugent-esque, wasn't it?
Well, I wanted to say it on the group, that is David Nugent 101 right there. Like, absolutely.
Nicking it on the line.
Stole it on the line.
Yeah. But like getting them to the back post, being impactful, like that sort of stuff you want from your kind of box-to-box number 8, and he's doing that now. And good luck to him. I've always quite liked his character, Weston McKennie.
He seems like a good lad,
Yeah, and I remember watching it was in the All or Nothing, like I remember the stuff about like when they were talking about like what food that they eat and all that kind of thing. He just came across as like quite a laugh.
He has rattled Italians more. His like for rattling Italians is through
pizza
the roof.
with ranch sauce.
And his recent one and I told the girlfriend this, and her reaction was exactly the same: pesto and pasta with tomatoes and chicken. And she was like, "What the fuck is that?" I was like, I think it sounds good. I think it sounds good.
That sounds like a uni meal, doesn't it? That's like a uni meal.
It does, yeah.
Massively. But yeah, Italians were disgusted. But Adam, you raised in the group as well that you think the Leeds loan was a bit of a wake-up call for him, because he has come back as an absolute new player, right?
100%, because look, there was already rumours that Juventus wanted to sell him at that point anyway. So the fact that he got that loan spell to Leeds under Jesse Marsch, it didn't turn out as well as he expected. Leeds fans made it very obvious that it wasn't going to work out anyway. And then obviously coming back to Juventus, there's talks about how he's set up his fitness regime. He was the fittest player when they turned up for the summer. He was doing excessive runs and stuff like that. And you can see he's benefiting from that. I'm a bit like you guys. I don't know where his best position is. I don't know if I'd necessarily have him if there was a better option in front of him. But you have to say his form has been impressive, and he's just constantly running, which is, I think, why Allegri likes him, because he will do exactly what he wants him to do. He will just chase down balls. He will do the absolute maximum. But to Jose's point, he said, is he the best American this season? I mean, we've got the LeBron James in Milan, haven't we? We've got
he's
tearing it up. So how did he miss that? I'm sorry, Jose, you got that one wrong.
You missed that massively. We're going to leave Juventus there and their ominous title challenge. Over to you, Inter, with your game in hand. And we're going to go for Adam. We're going to talk about a Polish player. He's come back home to Empoli. And what an impact he's having. The first goal is an absolute rocket of a finish.
Ben-
Unbelievable performance. We've talked about Empoli just not being able to score goals. They've had, 10 goals all season, and he's now added 4 in 2 games.
It's incredible, absolutely incredible. I called him on our TikTok story today, the legend from Empoli, because that's what he is. He's every time he's been there, he's been absolutely magnificent. Obviously, now it's a permanent signature from Spezia. And, you know, he looks at home. He looks comfortable in that environment for some reason. And with David Nicola maybe doing the escape from... He's doing it. He's doing it again. He did it for Crotone. He did it for Salernitana.
Yeah.
And we joked about it privately. We said, when are Salernitana going to face Empoli? And it's in a few weeks' time.
Yeah.
Literally, you couldn't have scripted it. It's
in Salerno,
incredible.
It's going to be hot.
But Empoli have started to add some interesting players. They got Alessio Seri from Como. He's a striker at the moment. So again, there's some potential experience there in terms of goal threat up front. If they can get Baldanzi playing as well, I think this could be just what they need right now. Obviously, it's still quite tight in that kind of relegation battle at the moment. There's so many clubs being dragged into it, and it seems to be tossed and turns in terms of how these kind of game weeks go by. I think I saw it from what I could remember. Empoli, I think, have the hardest of all the kind of run-ins because they have to still play a lot of the bigger sides. But this was a fantastic result. And Zurkowski, like I say, that was a perfect hat trick. I didn't even realize it was a perfect hat trick until someone said it in commentary. Obviously, left foot, right foot, and with his head. Beautiful. Incredible. Unbelievable. Absolutely beautiful.
And the whole time I was watching it, I was like, there is a genuine, there is absolutely 100% the thing of a perfect club for a player. Just the environment is just everything's fine, everything's good, and that seems like Empoli for Zurkowski. So unbelievable for him. Empoli fans will be delighted, and that's a massive win for them because Cagliari down there, they drop points despite going 1-0 up. They lose 3-1 to Frosinone. My pick of the goals was the Sule free kick, without a doubt. Incredible goal. And Frosinone get revenge. Now, they've been in pretty terrible form, so it was absolutely massive for them to get this win here. And again, for them to come from a goal behind, just incredible stuff. Caio Jorge getting the goal at the end, another Juve loanee out there in Lazio. And... massive result for them. Great for Frosinone, and just gives them a little bit of hope, a little bit of breathing space. They're on 22 points, puts them 5 points ahead of the relegation. So massive result for them. And then finally, Salernitana let another lead slip. I saw they have let 17 points go from winning positions this season, the most in the league. Candreva nearly scored an absolute rocket, bouncing the ball off the crossbar to level it. I feel like Salernitana were quite unfortunate in this game. Ben, I don't know if you saw the penalty decision, but Adam, it looked like he headed it onto his arm. I thought that meant it wasn't a penalty.
That's what I thought. I thought it was a bit unfortunate, but I think he's just given it because he's seen it as a handball. He hasn't necessarily seen the previous action, or maybe he's just forgotten that it was a header that came off him. I don't know. But Salernitana have been very unlucky in the last few games. You saw it against Napoli, where Mazzari goes and consoles Inzaghi at the very moment when they concede that kind of late goal against Rachmani at the time. So, Salernitana seem to be getting closer and closer. Obviously, there's rumours about getting quality players through the door. It sounds like, obviously, Jerome Boateng by the end of this week will be confirmed. And Super Mario, we could be seeing him in Serie A, but with Salernitana, I mean, I cannot wait for that to happen. Just for the moment, just to see him do that back heel when no one's looking and it goes into somewhere else, right? But
we need it. We need it. I feel like it's the perfect club for this to happen. Boateng, Balotelli, get them all in. This would be incredible. Salerno, we need you to stay up. We need you to stay up, but it's not looking good. It is not looking good. But guys, that is everything in Serie A this week. Was there anything else we wanted to cover? Any transfer stories that we found vaguely interesting this week? It's really quiet in the Premier League. Really quiet.
It's just us. Just Spurs. We're just holding the fort for everybody.
Spurs being linked with everyone, right? Nusa and various other players. But I think there'll be late business, personally. Almiron to El Shabab.
Who could have seen that coming?
Fucking, Kel Surprise. Jesus Christ. They're desperate to get rid of him, and a Saudi team come in for it. Couldn't believe that. Could not believe it. And in Serie A, there's no real business apart from Super Mario possibly making a return.
I think there'll be some other businesses taking place. I would expect Hellas Verona still to do something. Calgary are still linked with Sherandor, the youngster at PSG. He's been linked with a few clubs down at the bottom. Karol Swiderski, another Polish striker, could be making his way from Charlotte FC to Serie A. We're waiting to see what happens there. But no one kind of springs to mind. And Goj was linked with Bournemouth, I believe, but in Bournemouth put in a late bid for him, but got declined because he was already on his way to Napoli. There is someone else I seem to remember.
There was another Napoli rumor, but it's gone now. I feel like they're really...
Fiorentina have been possibly signing Brian Rodriguez from somewhere in Argentina.
Yes.
And then Toney going to Lazio. And then the funniest rumor I've seen is Sergei Milinkovic-Savic wanting to go back to Lazio just because he saw the guys recently at the Supercoppa. So, it was inevitable, like the rest of those signings. Like, it won't take long before Benzema's back on the plane to Real Madrid or something stupid.
No, he's coming to the Emirates and he's going to deliver us the title. 10 years after he was meant to arrive, he's going to come to the Emirates. It has to happen. Please, Arteta, just bring him in for 6 months. It has to happen. We need it. 15-year-old me needs to see it happen because I put a lot into that transfer rumor. I put a lot into it.
Get Higuain as well.
Yeah, why not? Get all the band back together. Him and who's the German bloke that was at PSG we were linked with forever?
Draxler,
that's him.
Oh,
Get
Draxler.
him on board. Yeah. Get him going as well. Why not? We just need goals. But guys, thanks for joining us. As always, you can find us on Twitter at Italian Anglo Pod, on Instagram and TikTok at Anglo-Italian Pod. Hit the like and subscribe button down here. Don't forget to tell your friends. Give us a rating on your podcast app. All those great things. Ben, anything that our listeners and viewers can be looking out for coming from you?
Same old. Ben Talks Football on TikTok. One other thing I wanted to shout out was Adam mentioned it earlier, but the Lab podcast produced by The Fighting Cock, obviously the biggest and best Spurs podcast. I've been on a couple of the episodes. There was one out last week talking about Postecoglou's impact at Tottenham. So go and listen to that if you want to listen to it. There was a good one that came out today with HL2C on Twitter, Hopkins looking to curl one, the famous Crystal Palace fan, the biggest one on Twitter, sort of talking about Tottenham from a neutral fan's perspective, which is a really interesting listen. So go and have a listen to that. But other than that, usual places.
Very good. Adam, anything to say before we send these people home?
I'm just going to do a Jake Humphrey and say, even if you don't have TikTok, download it and just follow us. That's all I ask. So do it.
All this, guys, and we didn't even talk.
Things.
We've got for a whole show about talking about the Nuno Tavares video as well. So good work, guys. We avoided it. We managed. Nobody referenced it. It's fine. Nobody's referenced it. So, guys, we will see you next week. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you on Friday for the podcast. Ciao. A dopo.
Ciao.